We're going to get started with our second week of our Sustainability Webinar series. First of all, my name is Jason Hummel, and I'm one of the presenters for the series, but not for today. But I wanted to welcome you to our second week of the webinar series. The first week, the instructor got sick, so technically this is the second week. So if you're returning, welcome back. If this is your first time joining the webinar, welcome. We hope that it's a benefit and a real, some good knowledge that you'll be able to take forward with you into your current position and your current job. Before we get started with our presentation today, I did want to remind everybody, if you're logging on to the call, please keep your audio on mute. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And what I'll do is as those come in, I'll address them with our presenter today. And then she'll be able to answer those as we bring them up. So please use that feature. Also wanted to just to let you know that next week is when the first webinar that got canceled has been rescheduled to. So if originally you weren't planning on joining for next week, make sure you jump on the call next week so you get that webinar information as well. With that, I wanted to introduce our presenter for today, Ms. Nicole Burman. She joined the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the summer of 2009 as an interior designer for Kansas City District Design Branch, eventually receiving her LEED AP certification and becoming a registered interior designer. She has primarily worked on military design projects within the region, including several mega and international projects. Her current role is serving as the Design Branch Technical Service Section Chief, where she supports the district in AE acquisitions and the Value Engineering Program. For many years, she utilized her LEED training as District Sustainability Manager, where she helped facilitate high performance and sustainable designs, leading many projects to LEED Silver and Gold certifications. So without further ado, this is Ms. Nicole Burman. Nicole, take it away.
Wonderful, thank you. So welcome everybody to today's discussion. We're going to be diving into that construction piece. Really, of course, we identify this in every single one of our presentations, emphasizing on that integration part and identifying what are we trying to integrate with and with our teams and the importance of that. I'd like to also remind us, right, if we've got our DORs working diligently, incorporating those significant sustainable design strategies into our projects, we want to make sure, right, through the entire design and into construction, we're utilizing those plans and specifications to construct those projects. Otherwise, we may not then result in that high performance sustainable building, which is our ultimate goal here. So when we're talking today, we're looking at that understanding of sustainable requirements as they pertain to that construction contract. And today we've got some resources for everybody. This presentation will be posted on our Teams, and I believe Jansen sends that out also. So if you wanted to look at these resources in more detail, you can do that. They range obviously from our UFC through to more specific items, our ECBs, the connection to our teams and so forth, of course, the TRI services. So as we move into our next slide, hang on one second. I think we've missed our control piece here. There we go. Okay, so today we'll discuss that UFC 1-200-02, the construction activities. That's what we're focusing on here. And as you see, we've got 4 of those pieces are broken down into that UFC, and we'll be walking through each one of those, including also talking some points on those construction documents themselves. So I'd like to make a plug for the importance of our UFGS 01-3329 sustainability reporting spec, and the importance of having that spec on all of our projects. Every single one of our projects, all the way through O&M, really have pieces of sustainability that need to be addressed and different levels of reporting and integration that we need to consider. So when we're in the construction phase, this specification identifies those expectations during that phase. What are those sustainability pieces that need to happen, right? What are those expectations for reporting, including, as we see here, that kickoff meeting. So I've seen this kickoff meeting be held and incorporated into the pre-construction conference, or it can be a standalone meeting. It just depends on how that is managed and worked. Then within this meeting, though, we want to talk about those sustainability goals. We want to talk about specific strategies that are being implemented, to achieve those goals, and how we can do that, discussion through that, what those expectations are, and then those unique construction methods that maybe we should be talking about if somebody has something that comes to the table, right? So we want to be a team and pull that information together in this meeting, identify those strategies and methods, bringing up those lessons learned, identifying the risks that maybe the contractor sees when they've been reviewing the documents. We want to bring all of that up right at the beginning. This is also an opportunity to potentially add that commissioning kickoff meeting. So I've also seen that be joint with this meeting, or it could be a follow-on, but the emphasis being, let's bring up expectations early, let's cover those submittals. There's several sustainability submittals that are pre-con submittals. So this is also a great opportunity to talk through those comments and expectations in that reporting and really get down to what those expectations are. That's what I see most of the time, is just trying to understand, be on the same page together as a team with the contractor and seeing those expectations. I see some chatter. Is there anything we want to discuss right now? One of those pre-construction submittals includes that sustainability action plan. This is, in my opinion, a very critical submittal. We want to make sure that it is truly in that early stage of construction, because what this signifies to us is that solid understanding that our contractor is tracking, understanding the expectations for the high-performance sustainable building piece that our UFC addresses, in addition to if that project is requiring third-party certification, we want to make sure that they understand the similarities, the differences, and what those requirements are and how they achieve those requirements that are written in the contract from start to finish. So in this plan, we're looking, it used to be called the lead implementation plan, so now it's called the sustainability action plan. Either way, it's showing us that there's an action here. It's an early phase, wanting to make sure that we're talking about that and work through what are the pieces that are going to be put into place to make sure that all of these pieces that are in the contract get accomplished. Eventually, then this plan itself falls into part of that sustainability notebook. Sometimes that's a little confusing. Really, there's actually a lot of plans that fall into the sustainability e-notebook, and that notebook really is that final record of what was talked about, what was concluded, how did things evolve, why did things change if they did, and then what was the achievement, right? Did we get third-party certification and so forth? So it's really a living construction plan too, the sustainability action plan. We want to, adjust that if need be to see, if something changed, then we want to make sure that that's identified and that we're all on the same page with that. I will say that we want to make sure too that it addresses those high performance sustainability versus lead pieces, because they're not always the same, or there may be small nuances that make it different in what we require for DoD projects versus what that third-party certification is requiring. It can also be utilized as part of that monthly progress meetings during construction. Sustainability really should be a line item in those meetings, consistently talking about it, consistently drawing back to this plan, seeing what those expectations when they anticipated having something done, or documents pulled together throughout construction, holding each other accountable to working those features. So many of you, this isn't a new piece, right? Really, we've got the three-phase control processes. This is standard in USACE process for the core in administrating construction contracts, but that really can be applied, and sustainability should be incorporated into those discussions, looking at that, meeting that specific performance expectations, the submittals, reviewing those with sustainability in mind, then working into the preparatory phase, looking at and confirming we've got the right products, looking at this being scheduled. Are there mock-ups required that are associated with these features that affect the sustainability? Wanting to make sure that discussion is being had. So we should assure that quality control, that the training is being done for the crew, understanding that site sustainability requirements, looking at specific sustainability requirements related to those features, wanting to make sure, like for instance, like indoor air, which we'll talk about a little bit later, indoor air quality, right? How do we handle that gypsum board and so forth? How do we protect our HVAC? All of that would be a part of that discussion, and looking through those checklists and understanding that we're being proactive in the way that we're doing all of these quality control, quality assurance processes. Okay. So this then kind of dives into that more specific, what are those construction features and pieces that go into that UFC, one of which is that sustainable site work. And this, again, is not something new. This is something we've done for a long time. The National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, right, has been a part of this and incorporated, where we look at making sure we're not running off oils, waters, other pollutants, dust, particles, sediments that are part of our construction. So really, this is not new, but we want to make sure we address how this is incorporated in sustainability. So the erosion and sediment control plan both is required under our 015719 spec, and that also goes in and is incorporated in recognizing that in the sustainability action plan, and then added to the e-notebook, showing that we see and the contractor sees the progression of this and how it's all integrated together as a project. And so it's important to kind of see how these pieces overlap and integrate. But this one I feel like is pretty standard in this case for design as a whole. So as we work through some of these pieces, we'll also be seeing LEED, so third-party certification itself, pop up here. I'm not going to spend much time on each one of these because we have a lot to really talk about today, but this is just an example. This is a prereq that is looking at that construction activity, pollution prevention element, and that's just what they associate that for LEED and that credit, and so we would align with those pieces to get our points and credit. Okay, so now we're going to dive into that commissioning element. This has several slides that talk about this. It will still be a high-level conversation, really, or talk today, trying to make sure we hit all the points. But if you need more detail, you need to dive in here, and I have it listed, I think, in another slide or so. But I would urge you all to review ER 11,110-345-723. So that really dives into commissioning, and if you need more information or would like to talk to people, you know, we're all of us part of the webinars can help guide, but also your local district would have people who would be able to talk through commissioning a little deeper. But when we're looking at this, you know, this may be falling under the construction here with our webinar today, and but they actually, here, I can answer this too. But it's not just for construction. You know, this isn't just a construction activity. We're looking at that quality focus that enhances that delivery of the project. There's a lot of pieces that happen in construction, but the success of commissioning really starts that early starting point in design. Now, again, we've been implementing forms of commissioning for decades as a government as a whole, and so it's evolved over time, but we've really got that total building commissioning element right now on our projects. So diving into more of those detailed pieces, the UFC in 2-2.2 identifies the commissioning requirements. It focuses on what used to be called ASHRAE 1A 9.1. So now we're looking at the International Green Construction Code. So this looks at incorporating commissioning into your projects. Of course, it needs to be appropriately incorporated to the size and complexity of your building. The ER has some information on that too. But really looking at what is that specific piece that you're trying to build and what systems and components are in that feature, and then making sure that we're putting those commissioning pieces that make sense for that project to that magnitude. We also want to look at these sections of the IGCC to see more of that in-depth. In the next slide, we'll see, or actually 2 slides, we'll actually see kind of a listing of what they identify in systems for commissioning itself. But all PDT needs to be involved in the commissioning process. So the next item here, we have our UFGS. That's an 01 spec, so 019100.1510 total building commissioning. So that specification, you know, a commissioning team can put together, the design or record can put together, but we want to make sure that all of those parties are involved in understanding what we are working towards, to the extent of what kind of testing we're doing. You know, there's an added element of like integrated system testing that could be really important if you're having a bunch of systems in your facility, right, that are needing to be integrated, and to ensure that that integration is working correctly and efficiently. And so that, to me, is a really great feature of commissioning that brings a lot of value to the project. So, but it may not be appropriate for every project, or you may not have those systems that are integrating. So we have to consider that and work through that early in the stage of what is the goal for that commissioning, and what are those owner project requirements for that piece. Again, we have this 01 spec here, but that doesn't cover everything commissioning. That's just that general approach, the commissioning plan, all these other pieces that we'll talk about in a minute that are discussed in there. There are other specifications that integrate and have commissioning pieces that apply, right? So this is something that we really want to have that discussion, including an example of that is that building air barrier pressure, so an 07 spec that provides that commissioning piece for the air barrier, but that's also just a pressure testing spec. There's going to be other details in the construction documents. There's going to be other specifications that are identifying how that should be constructed so that we meet that air barrier testing requirement. Okay, so here's the fun one, in my opinion, talking about that commissioning team. The ER breaks this up into several pieces, as we kind of see here in the listing. As USACE, we identify that as we are the commissioning authority. So that's where it can get a little complicated and confusing, but we kind of hold that hat. Like if you're talking about that top tier, that's where we hold that. And then we dive into who are those other members of our team? Who are those specialists? So when we're looking at CXG, that is the government commissioning specialist. So that is, if we aren't doing something, we're not doing the commissioning reviews, as in that main commissioning person who's certified to do commissioning in-house, then we're hiring an AE to do that. The CXG, the government specialist, is that hired AE. So that's who they are under this whole umbrella. And then we could have that commissioning team members, so design team members who have that hat of commissioning. And then same with construction. We want to have construction involved very early to talk about all these commissioning pieces and that integration. So that would be that part of the team. And then, of course, we have the owner. We have the designer of record. We have the construction contractor that would eventually get on board here, and then operations and maintenance staff. So all of that together is included as part of that commissioning team, and they all have various roles and responsibilities. They all have different levels of reviewing and authorities, and that's what has to get discussed at the very beginning. You know, start that discussion. How is it integrated? Pulling that into, I think the ER actually has a really great roles and responsibilities chart that can be evolved as needed, but that's a good starting point to work through those pieces of who's doing what and to what point, and it really works well, and really, from my experience, springboards all of that conversation into how commissioning gets accomplished and completed.
Nicole, can I add one item on this one?
Yes, absolutely.
So one thing that, with USACE being the commissioning authority on the commissioning team, depending on a couple different things, who your third-party certification is going through and what type of contract you're dealing with, you may have to, as the government, put together some kind of a narrative to kind of explain how the commissioning team functions and what each member of the team does. I know right now I'm working on getting a lead project certified, and because the reviewer didn't quite understand how our commissioning team functioned, we had to put together kind of a narrative explaining to them the unique aspect of how USACE is the commissioning authority and how the different members function together. So you may have to do that depending on your project.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've had to do something similar to, and really, I think, I can't remember where we placed it, but we placed it somewhere in the sense that for the purposes of third-party certification, our commissioning specialists hired by the government, so in this case, right, for our terminology, the CXG is considered the CXA. So almost like flipping that around, helping them understand that they perform the duties as industry applies CXA versus how we as USACE maintain that government authority for the processes we pursue. Okay. We've got a question here, in-house designers for CXG or CXD. So CXD would be, well, it depends on what role they're playing. So when they're just serving as designer of record, they would just be the designer of record, in my opinion there. But if they also are serving or doing the specifications, or having dual-hatted, which I've done before too, right, which is fine, they would also then be considered that CXD. So it just depends on the magnitude of your project. Are you needing that kind of third-party grouping of designers pulled out so that they're reviewing and almost doing that added piece there, or are you having them do and serve as those two roles? So I'm trying to read Kathleen's comment here. Okay, so I don't know if I'm grasping that quite yet, but could you provide examples? Yeah, I'm sure that we could pull that together if we make note of that, Jensen and Jason. Yep. Jason, you've got a good example then, sounds like. Okay, awesome. So diving into the systems really here, this is where that IGCC comes into play in those references, looking at what those systems should or could be considered. Also, there are, I believe, now I'm trying to remember. I'm spacing on that. I feel like there's a list. Oh, maybe it is the ER that requires a certain number or certain elements of this list to be incorporated depending on the size and magnitude of your project. And then, but that does not mean that the project can't identify additional systems. So this is where that early consideration needs to be had, and the team can sit down and talk through what systems should be incorporated in what you know as the designer of records, what you know you're putting in the project. Traditionally, right, we've focused solely on the HVAC system as being that commissioned element. Now we're looking at that total building. So we're looking, we're kind of seeing that evolution, or we've seen that evolution through LEED and through the whole, you know, through our UFC, the HVSB requirements, and those have really expanded into those other systems. The ones that we have highlighted here are the ones that really need that designer confirmation and how extensive that commissioning is, right? We're looking, maybe lighting is integrated with other things, really looking at all of those renewable energies, what pieces are we pulling together into the project. But we also want to understand the owner's project requirements. So they need to be a part of the conversation here. We want to see if there's other things that they're seeing that needs to be incorporated, or to what level, right? This costs some money, so we want to make sure that we understand to what extent we're expanding this commissioning element past a typical QA effort by the construction contract or the construction team itself. And so really too, looking at, you know, there's elements like irrigation, fenestration controls, things like that could be considered. You know, if we've got integrated window features, fenestration controls, we want to make sure that they're responding on cloudy days. We want to make sure that they're not interfering with furniture or other items like that. So there's a lot of discussion that can be had when we're talking about the commissioning systems itself. Is there anything we need to cover from the chat? There's a lot going on. I can't keep up with it. Ian, did you raise your hand? Okay, so hopefully we'll have some time at the end too if we need to talk some more about this. So commissioning activities, we are looking at a lot of items that are incorporated into those activities. These activities are identified in the IGCC. And so when we're looking at the owner's project requirements, a lot of times I get questions about, okay, we have another document we have to make. So what we found over the years, really most most districts or design teams are utilizing their PCRs or their charrette reports or even the RFP as those owner project requirements, because we really want to mitigate some of that risk by having duplicated requirements. And so we also have more efficiency if we apply some of these pieces together. But again, similar to identifying the government CXG as the commissioning authority for third party, we also want to make sure that that's clearly written somewhere. So I've actually seen that written in the 0191 spec to clearly state owner's project requirements are the same as the charrette report or this RFP, right? We want to make sure that that's clear. Then we also have that basis of design. That's the commissioning term for it. Sometimes we use that term ourselves, but we also use design analysis. So those are one and the same. That's really diving into how did we take those owner project requirements and put that into the design. How did they evolve? Why did certain things happen? What do we need to be cautious of? All of those pieces are pulling that into the evolution of design and then into construction. So we then have a whole list here. We've got a whole list of those construction documents are part of this, the commissioning plan. Teams need to identify, are you making a draft commissioning plan that then is utilized or created during design and then utilized by the contractor afterwards, or are they picking that up right away? And here's kind of those nuggets that proceed from that, and they're allowed to format it any way they want. But the plan itself really dives into what those, maybe this is actually covered on another slide, I can't remember, but want to make sure I identify that we want to make sure that that commissioning plan identifies what the whole team, you know, including government and everything, what are those roles and responsibilities, how are those defined, and moving through that, and that is a living plan, but that the specification itself, the 0191 spec, is focused then on what are we asking that contract to do as a contract document. We want to make sure that we're focused on the contract and not on everybody's specific pieces. So there's a little nuance in there that we want to keep track of and have in our discussions as we go through commissioning pieces. And then, of course, reviewing construction submittals and who's doing that, how's it all integrated, looking at that installation and performance training. Training's another big thing we want to keep in mind. How's the owner wanting to be trained? To what extent? Video, you know, all of those features that can be incorporated in the contract. Looking to make sure we understand to what magnitude we need that commissioning report. Systems manual, is that systems manual the same thing as or similar to that O&M? Does the systems manual go one step further? Are there tagging requirements we want to include to help the owner out in the end? All of these things can come into question, right? And we want to figure out during design and getting into that contract. Okay, so lessons learned in commissioning. We want to identify and designate those authorities early. So when we're looking at schedules and projects, we identify, you know, for an in-house project, potentially we've got that element, hey, we don't have a commissioning or a set-aside commissioning team, or we don't have the workload, isn't going to be able to support a set-aside commissioning team. We're going to need to get somebody. So that's an AE action that we're going to need to be thinking about right at the beginning. We want them on board, you know, preferably before 35%, but no later than 50%, right? We want to make sure that we get that integrated into the project itself. And we want to get those roles and responsibilities figured out. We want to understand what those commissioning reviews are looking like. That's another sticking point that really wants to make sure we work with our construction team to understand what those reviews are, both in design and then what those are physically for the submittals in construction. And then adequate time. So this is another soapbox item for me, but we've got to make sure that we identify commissioning in our schedules, right? So we need to have that and see that from the contractor detailed out in their construction schedules, because it's not just a red zone activity. It used to be that way or used to feel that way, but you know, there's a lot of pieces of review and prep and testing. All of those pieces come at different phases of the construction, especially when we're talking about the exterior of the building, looking at that air tightness features and so forth. So we want to make sure that that is in a schedule and people are tracking it and linked to things. Yeah, so I think there's a comment there, you know, construction schedule should be a part of that commissioning activity too. So I think those are absolutely linked together and be a part of that conversation, even having the commissioning team review the construction schedule, right? Like back and forth, really integrated in that conversation. So again, here's third-party elements. So this is wrapping up our commissioning talk, but really we're looking at, for LEED specifically, they have two credits. One's that prereq, which is that fundamental commissioning and verification. So that general requirement that we would need and meet. And then, so really, you know, our ECBs are, you know, requirements already in the UFC should be meeting this requirement. Of course, as we mentioned before, you always need to pay attention to, if we're going after third-party certification, we want to pay attention to how removed that CXA or CXG, whoever's that LEED commissioning certified individual is, where should they be sitting, right? Making sure they're most likely not integrated with the design team would be what we would want to be seeing. And then the secondary one here, which is an opportunity, which we should be, you know, almost meeting naturally if we're following the ER, if not meeting it all the way for enhanced commissioning. So really adding, I think that really adds that envelope element, that total building element into here, which would meet or get us darn close to getting that enhanced commissioning. So this pulls together when I'm looking at this combination here. This is kind of that comparison and that interrelationship of what we see here. When we're looking at that total building commissioning, we should be covering that prereq and that credit itself when as long as we've got those right people on board and working that process. So it's kind of a little visual of how those pieces align when we've got that early engagement, and then we've got that post review element identified during O&M process. Okay. So we can now stop talking about commissioning for a moment, a lot of commissioning talk, and move into those other features that we've got during construction. So we're looking at the UFC, identifying this in particular that we see here in 2-5.3.1, looking at that moisture control. So we're trying to control that moisture in the building or where we don't want it to be collecting, ensuring that we have that indoor environmental quality. And again, we're looking at that IGCC piece, just calling out, you know, protection of materials from damage. So we do not want to install anything that has that biological growth or moisture, right? We're wanting to avoid growing mold in our buildings. This, of course, seems like a no-brainer, but this is where we want to make sure we're including that in our conversations. It may seem natural to make sure that elements are covered up, buildings are dried in, and features are not getting damaged by moisture. But we also know things happen, but to ensure that those things get resolved or don't happen, we're talking about them in our preparatory meetings. We're making sure that we're talking about during our monthly sustainability meetings. We're making sure that materials aren't arriving too early to the site, questioning potentially why we're there, and if they are there, how are you going to confirm that we're going to protect them and keep them away from potential risk here. Nope, my cursor, there we go. Okay. So when we're looking at another item is that protected the air quality during construction. So here it's mainly focused on really those materials that could absorb or be damaged during construction. For that air quality piece, again, we have approaches and things we have to consider from the International Green Construction Code. And we're looking at that air conveyance material. So all these images you see here, we're covering up our HVAC equipment. We're ensuring that they're always covered up, making sure that no dust and pieces are coming into that system that could cause long-term issues for the health of the building and the people who are in it. And then we are requiring all the correct filters, right? The design requires it. We ensure that those are installed correctly. The controls are in place when we're operating the HVAC system during building flush out, that we've got that figured out. And that really we're identifying, again, in our construction schedule, when that flush out is going to happen, making sure that that's linked to something. So if we know things move because things happen, we know that that's affecting that flush out piece, and thinking about what the ramifications really are, and if that's meeting our sustainability goals, or how we can adjust that and work together to find a good solution. But it's important, I think, when we hear the term flush out, we kind of hear it in a lead sense, but we also need to see that, and more importantly, understand that the UFC requires us to meet these items, store, keep it covered, to make sure our post-construction pre-occupancy is handled either by that flush out or that air quality monitoring. So those are UFC requirements that happen to be able to be integrated into that third-party piece. So for third party, we have the plan, right? The air quality management plan. This would be incorporated into that e-notebook per our specifications, but this is required as a prerequisite for LEED specifically. And then we've got the assessment. So an opportunity for the team is to see if this is going to be a part of that project and a part of the scope for the contractor. And then, of course, tracking that. If we've identified that the contractors agreed, that this is something they'll pursue at the beginning of construction, we want to make sure that we track that and we understand that that is a credit that would be lost, right, if we don't pursue it in the right manner. So this is important to know if we're pursuing that credit or not, but that's how that's integrated with our UFC. Okay, waste and material management. So this is something that's probably not new to any of us, but when we're looking at the requirements, I guess I would just note that the IGCC requirement actually requires a minimum of 50% waste diversion, but our UFC and other policies require that 60%. So that did increase, I don't know, a handful, I feel like maybe 10 years ago. I feel like it's been a while, but either way, our standard spec for that has that written in there. It should be covered and taken care of for us, but we want to be aware of what those requirements are, that the 60% is required. I will also note that we're looking at that non-hazardous construction and demolition waste. This has come up before where we're like, hey, we got a lot of abatement. There's no way we can meet this, but that's not included. We're looking at that non-hazard. This is also where we want to track all those calculations. Anything that's leaving that site, we need to be accounting for that. We need to see those haul records. Those need to be shown in a timely fashion in that e-notebook that's supposed to be reviewed and looked at every month during the construction phase. And so all of these pieces would be integrated, and being aware of what's moving on site, what's working through that, and then where is that information implemented into our record documents. So diverting, I probably actually covered most of the same stuff here, really looking for evidence of meeting that, talking about that sustainability goal, demonstrating that compliance with the haul records, but also talking about those in your preparatories and the toolbox, making sure that all subs and people you know, involved are aware of this, and tracking that somebody else is also monitoring this, right? Somebody is keeping track of this, and that this has some importance to the project. All right, so we also identify in the 013329 spec the contractor's sustainability, you know, professional. So this could be that lead AP BD plus C if we're doing the version 4, right? They actually require that to be within the same lead system that you're applying for certification. But if it's being concluded, or the project is, you know, obtaining a different third party or verification of some sort, if you're Air Force and so forth, right? That could be the lead AP or some other type of credential that you want to put in that specification. So that's not accounted for specifically in a spec. So if you are working with other agencies or somebody, you want to make sure that you're identifying if that's appropriate to open maybe that requirement up a little bit. But we still want that sustainability professional there. Those individuals, even if you're doing a guiding principle validation, if they have a lead AP, they're going to have those principles and those pieces and that awareness that we need, that professionalism, to be incorporated into the process. And I have seen projects that maybe don't have that person on board, and it's tough. It's tough to work through that process, and there's a large learning curve, and maybe things aren't getting tracked because we don't have that professional on board. And so it's important to ensure that we're confirming that they've got somebody and that they meet whatever standards we've written into that specification.
Nicole, we have one question, I think, from the last slide. Kathleen said, do we have guidelines for how much contractors have to look for C&D recyclers as far as distance? And she's thinking about when you have a project that's in a really rural area where maybe there isn't one close by, is there some kind of a, you know, exemption for something if you're not close enough?
I'm trying to remember when we may have discussed this between the groups here. I don't off the top of my head know of that exemption, but I do know that that is an issue in some of our site locations, that could be a major problem because of the distance between those places. Have you had experience with that yourself, Jason?
I haven't, because most of my projects are fairly close to large metropolitan areas. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a good question. We can kind of note that and see if other people have had that experience too. I know that I think Seattle has an installation that's pretty far out there that has some issues with that too. So we may be able to pull something together. Okay. So when we're talking about the sustainability professional, Yep, Greg said it. So we also want to make sure that they're being integrated. They're actively participating, seeing occasionally on site. We're seeing them review submittals before they come to the government. I will say that that's maybe more of a best practice and a lesson learned that I have here. I don't believe that our specification at this time requires that, or like all of the specifications. So that's something you want to maybe consider when you're looking at, especially in a design build scenario, I think is where we've seen it more often. You're wanting to have somebody say, hey, government, we validate that this is meeting all of those sustainability requirements that we have promised, right, that we've laid out, identified in our plan, and so forth. That might be an opportunity to put something specific in that specification to draw attention to the contractor for that. But we also want to make sure that we have somebody to communicate with. Who do we talk to get that correspondence in response on sustainability? They would be serving all of those roles and making sure that the documents are being pulled together in a timely fashion, showing up in that e-notebook, getting ready for that third-party review, and so forth. So they do play a key part and should be included in the sustainability monthly meetings or touch-in action items on the monthly calls and so forth. Okay, so documentation. We're looking at the quality assurance. Are we seeing, as we walk that site, are we seeing items and proof that we're meeting all of those requirements that's hopefully been discussed during those meetings, seeing products being covered up, air quality being protected, sites having the right pieces involved so that we don't have sediment all over the place, erosion control, and so forth. We want to see photos of that. Again, that e-notebook should start to, get larger and larger as the project goes on. We want to see all of those pieces being recorded and identified to show that proof of that, and then those tracking everything that leaves that site, so those tracking documents, those logs, and so forth. Okay, so the big moment comes. We've got construction, winding down. Things are potentially or soon to be closed out. We've got this third-party certification happening. A lot of things are in mind. So hopefully at this stage, when we're in the red zone, this isn't the first time we're talking about sustainability or any awareness of that third-party certification needing to be submitted. We want to be reviewing maybe with some more diligency with that sustainability e-notebook in the red zone, because we want to make sure that all this information is documented. I will tell you that we've had situations where contractors have had issues, their own business issues, right? Having issues trying to close contracts, or they go under or something. The only thing the government has to fall back on is what is documented in that notebook. So we want to see timely documentation so that if the worst could happen, hopefully not, never fun, but if the worst happens, we have all of the information at our fingertips to continue the process to the best of our ability. So there is importance to have that documentation incorporated. And then the third-party certification, and that's at substantial completion. I will say that a lot of times I see contractors finish the job and then they go to put the documents together and start to pull in. That does not have to happen that way. Best practice really would be pulling that information together, having their sustainability person on board, and incorporating that in and submitting it as soon as we can. We want to make that proactive step in submitting that documentation for third party as soon as you can. So that's substantial completion. So we can submit that before we're really turned over or anything to our customers. I will make sure that we all note before they push the button for submit, we really need to be looking at that stuff online, having a professional on the government side do a quick look through. That's not them looking at everything that was uploaded. That's simply, did we mark things as ready for review? Do they have the typical kind of, okay, they've got 5 documents here for this credit. That's typically what we'd have, and that's what the third-party certification needs. In general, it looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and give them the thumbs up to submit. So that's just that little QA portion there to make that step. But all of this can happen before everything's moved out and moved into a full closeout scenario. Okay. So a part of that, and we're getting close in time, I think I only have a couple more slides to do, so that's good. Part of all this is that record card documentation. So on the whole building design guide, there are expectations for each tri-service that identifies what they're wanting to be reported, and the energy and sustainability record card has had a facelift recently, and so it looks a little bit different, but still has the nuts and bolts that we've seen before, and just needs to be filled out. The majority of it, if not almost all of it, would be during design and then verified and confirmed in construction and submitted per each agency's process. So just wanted to plug that to remember that that's still an item that we want to track and make sure we get that right project information in there so that teams can report that. And on this next slide, we have kind of the reason why that's important. So it's important because there's the DD 1354, and it has a spot for sustainability code. And so we want to make sure that our buildings, this real property piece, is identifying, and we're being clear with our partners, with our installations and our owners, making sure that we say and identify that we've met those guidelines. The meaning of those guidelines start at the beginning of design and work all the way through from design and through construction. So there's also lessons learned indicating that sometimes maybe headquarters or somebody sees input being identified as that value 3 there, assessed, not evaluated. And I think the reason why people have marked that is because they're waiting on that third-party certification, but that's coming later, before or after this form is created. So it is not my understanding that that's not the intent of this. We're getting it assessed. The guidelines are being assessed and being met, and that's what's done through the whole design and construction phase. So that's why it would be marked 1, while we're still trying to work through that process. And the reason this is important, from what I've learned, is that the real property records can't be changed after that. So we don't want to falsely identify something that we actually have achieved. And then for everybody's awareness, that third-party certification timeline. So this one's particularly focused on LEED, but if you're running up a project, didn't get things done, or money is being pulled away, whatever those scenarios may be, hopefully we've got them done in a timely fashion. But if that's the case and you find yourself there, this is a good thing to remember and see and understand what that timeline really is. We're looking at that 20, 25, 30-day time frame for those GBCI for LEED reviews. And then you get that combination, that preliminary moves you into a handful that would be accepted at first pass, a few that need that response by USACE or their designer of record. And then you move into that final review. And then you could still have ones that that aren't accepted and that have comments, and those would typically be denied credits. And so as the 013329 spec says, it is the responsibility to achieve that LEED Silver, and so therefore the responsibility of that contractor to appeal those credits and pay for that appeal. So those appeals do cost money, but really this whole process at the very minimum would take 2 months. So we really want to think through that and have that in that construction schedule, identifying that time frame there. Really, I would put it more than 2 months, but we want to be realistic here and understanding that it does take some time to move through that review. So with that, we're right on time, but if there are a question or two, I am here to help answer. And of course, if you have to dive off, I understand that too. So I'm not seeing anything. I appreciate everybody coming on board here. There's, of course, a lot to talk about. We've got other webinars to jump on to talk about more in depth for those other pieces in our schedule. So please join us again. Join us on MS Teams group if you have additional questions. Hopefully we can get some of those answers even from today out for people. So thank you all for coming.